You have 48 hours to pack your things and get out of my house. Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, his expensive Italian suit perfectly pressed, his voice cold as January rain. My father's lawyer will be here Monday to finalize everything. This property belongs to me now. Lily stood by the window of the bedroom she'd shared with Richard for 14 years, one hand instinctively moving to her barely visible belly. 5 months pregnant at 39. And the stepson she'd raised since he was 13 was throwing her into the street like garbage. My name is Lily Sterling, and 24 hours ago I buried my husband. Today, the boy I taught to drive, helped through college, and loved like my own son just told me I have 2 days to disappear from the only home I've known since I was 25. Marcus, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. Your father wouldn't want this. We need to talk about what? Marcus cut her off, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. About how convenient it is that you're suddenly pregnant right after my father dies. About how you married a widower with money and now think you're entitled to his estate? Lily had seen this coming. Not the pregnancy accusation that was new, but the rest of it. She'd seen the signs for months. The way Marcus had started showing up at the house more frequently after Richard's cancer diagnosis. The hushed phone calls with someone he'd quickly end when she walked into a room. The way he'd pulled his father aside during Christmas, talking about protecting the family legacy in voices just loud enough for her to overhear. But what Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew except one person, was that Lily had been paying attention. Very close attention. Marcus, I know you're grieving, Lily said, choosing her words carefully. But your father made provisions. There's a will. Oh, I know all about the will. Marcus pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the bed. This is the will, dated 3 months ago, signed by my father. Everything goes to me, the house, the business, the investments, all of it. You get nothing. Lily picked up the document, her hands surprisingly steady. She'd been an ICU nurse for 15 years before meeting Richard. You don't spend a decade and a half keeping people alive in critical condition without learning how to stay calm when everything's falling apart. She read the will slowly. It was professionally prepared, notarized, seemingly legitimate. According to this document, Richard Sterling had left his entire estate valued at roughly $2 million to his biological son Marcus, with a small provision of $50,000 to Lily Chen Sterling, in gratitude for her companionship. Companionship. Like she'd been a paid employee, not his wife. Where do you get this? Lily asked. My father gave it to me, obviously. Marcus checked his watch, a Rolex that Richard had given him for his college graduation. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. That $50,000 is generous considering you were only in his life for 14 years? I'm his son, his blood. This is my inheritance. Lily looked at the man standing in front of her. She remembered the terrified 13-year-old who'd shown up at their door 2 weeks after she married Richard. His mother had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, and he'd been living with his maternal grandmother. When the grandmother's health declined, Richard had brought Marcus home. The boy had been broken, angry, lashing out at everyone. It was Lily who'd sat with him through nightmares, who'd gone to every parent-teacher conference, who'd taught him to cook his first meal, who'd been there when he got his heart broken by his high school girlfriend. And now that boy, grown into a man who wore his father's watch and his grandfather's arrogance, was erasing her from the family like she'd never existed. I'll need more than 48 hours, Lily said calmly. I'm pregnant, Marcus. I'll need time to find a place, to move my things properly. 1 week, Marcus interrupted. That's all I'm giving you. And frankly, you should be grateful. Most people in your position would get nothing. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Lily, don't even think about contesting this. My lawyer says that as the biological heir, I have every legal right to this property. You're not blood. You were just there. 15 years reduced to 2 words. After Marcus left, Lily sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Richard and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to cry. Not because she was surprised, she'd suspected something like this might happen, but because it still hurt to have your worst suspicions confirmed. When the 3 minutes were up, she wiped her face, picked up her phone, and made a call. James, it's Lily. He made his move. Just like Richard said he would. James Porter, Richard's best friend and lawyer for 30 years, sighed on the other end of the line. Did he show you the fake will? He did. It's very convincing. It should be. Marcus paid $15,000 to have it forged. We've been tracking the payments from his account for the last 2 months. James paused. Are you sure you want to do this Richard's way? We could stop this right now. Produce the real will and... No, Lily said firmly. Richard knew his son better than anyone. He knew Marcus needed to show his true character before facing consequences. We stick to the plan. All right. Then I'll see you Monday at the reading. And Lily, record everything. Every conversation, every interaction. We'll need it. After hanging up, Lily walked to the closet and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were 3 items: a USB drive, a sealed envelope, and a small digital recorder. The USB drive contained video files. Lots of them. Richard had installed security cameras throughout the house 6 months ago, supposedly for safety. What Marcus didn't know was that those cameras had audio, and they'd captured some very interesting conversations. The envelope contained the real will, signed by Richard Sterling in the presence of James Porter and 2 other witnesses, dated exactly 2 weeks before the fake one. In it, Richard left 60% of his estate to Lily, 40% to Marcus, with very specific conditions attached to Marcus's inheritance. And the recorder? Well, that was Lily's insurance policy. Because when you're married to a wealthy man dying of cancer, and you notice his only son suddenly getting very interested in estate planning, you start keeping records. Marcus thought he was dealing with a naive woman who'd married for money and would disappear quietly with her $50,000 consolation prize. What he didn't know was that the woman he just threw out of his house had been 10 steps ahead of him for 6 months. And the trap he just walked into had been carefully designed by his own father. Richard Sterling had known his son was capable of cruelty. He'd hoped he was wrong, but just in case he wasn't, he'd made sure that if Marcus chose greed over family, he'd lose everything. And Lily was going to make absolutely certain that Richard's final wishes were honored, no matter what it took. Because the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's letting someone think they've won right before you show them the game was rigged against them from the start. If you're enjoying this story of justice and think Lily deserves to see this through, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next is going to make Marcus wish he'd been grateful for what he had instead of stealing what wasn't his. The next morning, Lily woke to find the locks changed. She'd gone to the grocery store to pick up prenatal vitamins, and when she returned 40 minutes later, her key no longer worked. She stood on the front porch of the house where she'd lived for 14 years, grocery bags in hand, staring at the door that wouldn't open. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Thought about it? You don't need a week. I had the guest house cleaned out. You can stay there until Friday. Your belongings will be moved today. Don't come back to the main house. The guest house. A 400-square-foot converted garage behind the pool that Richard had used for storage. No kitchen, just a hot plate and a mini fridge. One bathroom with a shower that barely worked. Lily walked around to the back gate. At least he hadn't changed that lock yet. The guest house door was open, and inside she found 3 suitcases, not even all of her clothes. Just what Marcus had apparently decided she could keep. Her laptop was there, her toiletries, some books. But her jewelry box was missing. The photo albums from her wedding. The painting Richard had commissioned of the 2 of them for their 10th anniversary. She called Marcus. He answered on the 5th ring, sounding annoyed. What? Marcus, my things? Your things are what I put in that guest house. Everything else belonged to my father, which means it belongs to me now. You're lucky I'm letting you stay on the property at all. The jewelry my mother left me before she died, Marcus. That's mine. It has nothing to do with your father's estate. There was a pause. Then Marcus laughed, short and cruel. The jade bracelet? The pearl earrings? Lily, my father bought you plenty of jewelry over the years. How am I supposed to know what belonged to your mother and what he gave you? It's all in the safe now, along with everything else valuable. Lily's mother had died when she was 19, leaving her only 3 pieces of jewelry, a jade bracelet that had belonged to Lily's grandmother, pearl earrings from her mother's own wedding day, and a simple gold locket with photos of both of them inside. They weren't expensive, but they were all Lily had left of her family. Those pieces have enormous sentimental value. Marcus, please, I'm not asking for anything else, just, I'll think about it. Marcus cut her off. Maybe after you're gone, and I've had everything appraised, I'll send you what I don't want. No promises though. He hung up. Lily sat on the narrow bed in the guest house and felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't grief anymore. This was strategy. Marcus was systematically trying to erase her, to make her feel small and powerless, to push her out not just physically but emotionally. What he didn't understand was that Lily had spent 15 years working in intensive care. She'd held the hands of dying patients, made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, and learned to function under pressure that would break most people. Marcus thought he was breaking her. He had no idea he was just making her more determined. That afternoon, a moving truck arrived. Two men Lily didn't recognize began carrying furniture out of the main house, furniture she and Richard had picked out together. The couch where they'd watched movies. The dining table where they'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners. The bed frame from their bedroom. She walked up to the workers. "Excuse me, where is all of this going?" One of them checked his clipboard. "Storage facility downtown. Mr. Sterling's orders. We're clearing out the main house for renovation." Marcus was already redecorating, removing every trace of his father's life with Lily like they'd never existed. Her phone rang. James Porter. "Lily, I just heard from my secretary that Marcus contacted a real estate agent this morning. He's putting the house on the market. He can't sell it." "Not yet. The estate hasn't even been through probate. Technically, he can't finalize a sale yet, but he can list it. He's moving fast, trying to liquidate everything before anyone questions the will." James paused. "How are you holding up?" Lily watched the movers carry out a bookshelf that Richard had built by hand. "I'm fine. Just letting him show everyone exactly who he is." "Good. Because Monday's reading is going to be very interesting. I've invited everyone Richard specified. Marcus, obviously. You. Richard's brother Thomas Marcus doesn't know he's coming. And I've asked Detective Morrison to attend as a courtesy." "Detective?" Richard wanted law enforcement present when certain evidence came to light. "Trust the process, Lily. I know this is painful, but it's almost over." After they hung up, Lily opened her laptop and began reviewing files. She'd spent the last 6 months documenting everything, just as Richard had asked her to. Not because she'd wanted to believe his son was capable of this, but because Richard had insisted. "If Marcus is the man I raised him to be," Richard had said 3 months before he died, his voice weak but determined, "then none of this will matter. But if I'm right about what I've been seeing, if he's been planning what I think he's been planning, then you're going to need proof. Evidence. Everything documented." Richard had noticed it first. Small things. Marcus asking detailed questions about the will. Making comments about how hard it must be for Richard to trust that Lily really loved him and wasn't just after the money. Subtle suggestions that Richard should protect his legacy and make sure his estate went to blood family. At first, Richard had dismissed it as a son's natural concern. But then Marcus had started visiting more frequently, always when Lily was at work. Richard had installed the security cameras after he caught Marcus going through his office files one afternoon. What those cameras captured over the next 3 months was damning. Marcus meeting with a paralegal who specialized in estate document preparation. Marcus on the phone with someone, laughing about how his father was too sick to know what he's signing anymore. Marcus bringing paperwork to Richard's bedside during his worst days, when the pain medication made him confused and disoriented. Richard had signed things during those visits. Marcus had made sure of that. But what Marcus didn't know was that Richard had been more alert than he'd appeared, and every single interaction had been recorded. Lily pulled up one video file, dated 6 weeks before Richard's death. In it, Marcus sat beside Richard's bed, holding papers. "Dad, this is just the standard estate paperwork. You remember we talked about this. Just sign here and here. It makes sure everything stays in the family." Richard's voice, weak. "Where's Lily?" I want Lily to look at this. She's at work, Dad, and honestly, this is family business. Sterling, family business. You understand. The implication was clear. Lily wasn't real family. Richard had signed that day. But later, when Lily got home, he told her everything and contacted James immediately to draft the real will. The one that would supersede anything Marcus tried to forge. Now, sitting in the guest house surrounded by 3 suitcases and years of memories packed away, Lily understood why Richard had been so insistent on doing things this way. He'd wanted Marcus to have every opportunity to do the right thing, to show remorse, to prove that the values Richard had tried to teach him had actually taken root. Instead, Marcus was selling their furniture and stealing her mother's jewelry. A knock on the guesthouse door interrupted her thoughts. Lily opened it to find a woman in her mid-30s, professionally dressed, holding a tablet. Mrs. Sterling? I'm Rebecca Chen from Prestige Realty. Your stepson hired me to list the property. I'll need to do a walkthrough of all structures on the premises, including this guest house. It shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. He's listing the guest house too? Rebecca looked uncomfortable. The entire property, yes. It's a premium location. Mr. Sterling believes it will sell quickly. She paused. I'm sorry. This must be difficult timing for you. Difficult timing. Lily's husband had been dead for 48 hours. I understand you're doing your job, Lily said carefully. But I'm living here currently and I'm pregnant. I'd appreciate some privacy. Rebecca's expression shifted to something like sympathy. Of course, I'll note that the guest house is temporarily occupied. But just so you're aware, once the property enters escrow, you'll need to vacate. She handed Lily a business card. If you need help finding a new place, I have some rental contacts. After Rebecca left, Lily sat down and opened a document on her laptop titled Timeline. She'd been maintaining it for months, noting every suspicious action, every conversation, every red flag. The document now had 127 entries. Entry number 1. Marcus asks Richard about life insurance policies during Sunday dinner. Richard deflects. Marcus persists, says he's just trying to understand the family finances. Entry number 84. Marcus arrives while I'm at work. Security footage shows him in Richard's office, photographing documents. When confronted, claims he was just looking for old family photos. Entry number 109. Richard's medication goes missing. Find it later in kitchen trash. Marcus says Richard must have thrown it away during confusion, but Richard's been lucid all week. Entry number 127. 2 days after Richard's funeral, Marcus serves me with eviction notice from guest house. Property being listed for sale. All belongings confiscated or disposed of. Every entry was backed up with photos, videos, or audio recordings. Every piece of evidence carefully dated and documented. Lily had learned something important during her years in intensive care: the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting was emotional, immediate, often counterproductive. Responding was strategic, calculated, effective. Marcus thought she was reacting hurt, vulnerable, defeated. He had no idea she was responding. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Forgot to mention, Dad's lawyer wants to do a formal will reading Monday at 10 a.m. You should probably be there. Might get your 50 grand faster that way. Don't be late. The arrogance in that message was stunning. Marcus genuinely believed he'd won, that Monday's reading would be a formality where his forged will would be validated and Lily would be dismissed with a pittance. What Monday's reading would actually reveal was about to destroy everything Marcus thought he'd secured. But Lily wasn't going to warn him. She wasn't going to argue or plead or try to make him see reason. She was simply going to show up on Monday morning and watch as 15 years of lies, manipulation, and forged documents collapsed around him like a house built on sand. Because that's the thing about people who underestimate you. They never see the trap until it's already closed. Friday morning arrived with rain hammering against the guest house windows. Lily had 3 days left before Marcus's deadline, and she'd spent the week watching him systematically erase her existence from the property. The garden she'd maintained for 12 years had been bulldozed to make the yard more appealing to buyers. The kitchen she'd renovated with Richard, Choosing every tile and cabinet pulled together was being gutted for a modern update. Even the tree they'd planted on their 5th anniversary, Japanese maple that Richard had loved, had been cut down because Marcus said it blocked the view. But the worst came Thursday night. Lily had been sitting in the guest house when she heard voices from the main house. Through the window, she could see lights on in the living room, music playing. Marcus was throwing a party. She walked closer and saw through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been Richard's pride. 20, maybe 30 people. Young professionals drinking expensive wine, laughing. Marcus stood in the center, holding court, a blonde woman draped on his arm. Lily pulled out her phone and started recording. "Finally mine," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying through the open patio door. "Took long enough, right?" Old man held on way longer than the doctors predicted. Someone laughed. The blonde woman kissed his cheek. "Well, you've earned it, babe. Putting up with that gold-digger stepmother all these years. Tell me about it." "You should see her now, living in the guest house like the help." Marcus raised his glass. "But not for long. By Monday, everything's official, and by next Friday, she's gone. Here's to new beginnings and getting what you deserve." The crowd cheered. Lily stopped recording and walked back to the guest house, her hands shaking. Not with sadness this time. With pure, cold fury. That night, she called James Porter. "He's celebrating," she said quietly. "Throwing parties while his father's been dead less than a week." "I know. I drove by earlier and saw the cars." James sighed heavily. "Lily, I need to tell you something. Marcus contacted me this afternoon. He wants me to expedite the probate process. He's claiming financial hardship, says he needs immediate access to Richard's accounts to maintain the property." "Financial hardship?" "He drives a BMW and lives rent-free. In a house he doesn't actually own yet, using credit cards that are maxed out." James paused. "I did some digging. Marcus is $340,000 in debt. Gambling mostly, some bad investments. He's been counting on this inheritance to clear everything. That's why he's pushing so hard. So fast." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about greed or cruelty. Marcus was desperate. He'd bet everything on his father dying and leaving him a fortune. And now he was drowning in debt he couldn't pay without that inheritance. "Does he know you're aware of the real will?" Lily asked. "No, and he won't until Monday." "I've been playing along, acting like everything's proceeding normally. Meanwhile, I've been gathering additional evidence." James's voice took on a sharper edge. "Lily, I need you to do something this weekend. Pack everything truly valuable to you, documents, photos, anything irreplaceable. Store it somewhere Marcus can't access." "Why? What's going to happen?" "Monday's reading is going to destroy him. When he realizes what Richard actually left behind, when he understands that we have proof of the forgery. Desperate people do desperate things. I don't want him having access to anything he could use as leverage or destroy out of spite." That Saturday, while Marcus was out showing the property to potential buyers, Lily systematically went through the guest house and identified everything that mattered. Her mother's letters, stored in a folder Marcus hadn't bothered to search. Her nursing credentials and certificates. The USB drive with all the security footage, which she made 3 backup copies of. She just finished when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Lily? Lily? Linnen? Lola? Mudded? Hello? Lily? Lily? I don't know. It's Thomas. Thomas Sterling." Lily sat
Richard's
down
brother.
slowly. She'd met Thomas exactly twice, once at her wedding, once at Richard's funeral where he'd flown in from Seattle for less than 24 hours. Richard had always said his younger brother was complicated, that they'd grown apart over the years after some family dispute. "Thomas, I'm surprised to hear from you. I'm sure you are." "Look, I got a call from James Porter. He said Richard wanted me at the will reading Monday. Said it was important." Thomas hesitated. "He also told me what Marcus has been doing to you. Throwing you out, stealing your belongings, selling the house. I want you to know that's not how Richard raised him." "Apparently it is," Lily said quietly. "No." Thomas's voice was firm. That's how our father raised Marcus's grandfather. Mean, greedy, entitled. Richard spent his whole life trying not to be like that, trying to raise Marcus differently. I guess, he trailed off. I guess some things skip a generation, but come back anyway. James said Richard wanted you there Monday. Do you know why? He sent me a letter 3 months ago. Told me what he suspected Marcus was planning. Asked me to be there when the truth came out. Said Marcus would need family who remembered what integrity looked like. Thomas laughed bitterly. Richard always was an optimist. Thought people could change, even when all evidence pointed otherwise. Will you come? I'm already here. Flew in this morning. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. He paused. Lily, James showed me some of the security footage. What Marcus said about you. What he's been doing. I'm sorry. You deserved better than this. After they hung up, Lily sat with those words. You deserved better than this. She'd spent the week questioning herself, wondering if she'd somehow caused this, if there was something she could have done differently to make Marcus see her as family instead of an obstacle. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Some people choose cruelty. Some people choose greed. And no amount of love or patience or second chances will change them. Richard had known that. He'd hoped he was wrong about his son. But he prepared for the possibility that he was right. Sunday evening, Lily's final night in the guest house before the reading, she received one last text from Marcus. Hope you've enjoyed your stay in my guest house. After tomorrow's reading makes everything official. I'm having it demolished. Terrible feng shui. Oh, and I went through that box of photos you left in the closet. Threw most of them out. Too depressing seeing my dad with someone who never actually loved him. But I kept the wedding album, thinking I might use it for kindling at my next party. See you at 10 a.m. Don't be late to collect your 50 grand. Lily read the message 3 times. The box of photos had been a decoy. Everything actually important was already secured elsewhere. But Marcus's casual cruelty, the way he mocked Richard's memory, the assumption that tomorrow would be his coronation. She pulled up her timeline document and added a final entry. Entry number 128. Marcus texts that he's destroying family photos and using wedding album for kindling. Confirms 0 remorse. 0 respect for Richard's memory. Tomorrow will reveal whether Richard's faith in the justice system was justified. Then she opened another file. One she'd been working on all week. A detailed account of everything that had happened since Richard's death. Complete with timestamps, screenshots, and witness statements. James had the legal evidence, the forged will, the financial records, the video footage. But Lily had something else. A narrative. A story of a dying man who loved his son enough to give him one last chance to do the right thing, and a son who chose greed over everything his father had tried to teach him. Tomorrow that story would be told in front of witnesses. In front of law enforcement. In front of Marcus himself. And unlike the fairy tales, Marcus had apparently believed about inheritance and entitlement and getting everything handed to you without consequences. This story had an ending that couldn't be rewritten. Lily looked around the guest house one final time. Tomorrow, she'd walk into James Porter's office as the grieving widow Marcus had dismissed and discarded. She'd walk out as the primary heir to a $4.2 million estate, holding evidence of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse that could send Marcus to prison. But more than that, she'd walk out knowing that Richard's final act had been one of profound love not just for her, but for the son he'd hoped would become a better man. That hope had died. But justice, Lily was about to discover, had a pulse that wouldn't quit. Because tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., Marcus Sterling was going to learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness and silence for defeat. And the look on his face when he realized the game had been rigged against him from the moment he decided to forge his father's will? That was going to be worth every humiliating moment of the past week. Monday morning. James Porter's law office occupied the top floor of a building overlooking downtown, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows. Lily arrived at 9:45 a.m., wearing a simple black dress, her pregnancy barely showing, her mother's jade bracelet on her wrist. The one piece she'd managed to retrieve from her own belongings before Marcus locked everything away. Wait. She didn't have that bracelet. Marcus had taken it. She wore nothing on her wrists. That was the point. The conference room was already occupied when she entered. Marcus sat at the head of the table like he owned it, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000 money he'd charged to credit cards he couldn't pay. Lily now knew. The blonde from the party sat beside him, introduced as Jennifer, my fiancée. Fiancée. Richard had been dead 6 days. Thomas Sterling stood by the windows, arms crossed, watching his nephew with an expression Lily couldn't quite read. A man in a police uniform sat near the door. Detective Morrison, she assumed. And James Porter sat at the opposite end of the table from Marcus, a stack of folders in front of him, his face carefully neutral. Well. Marcus checked his watch. The widow arrives. Cutting it close, Lily. Afraid you'd miss your consolation prize. Jennifer giggled. Lily said nothing, taking a seat beside Thomas. Now that everyone's here, James began, we can proceed with the formal reading of Richard Sterling's last will and testament. I want to thank you all for coming, especially Detective Morrison, who's here at the request of the deceased. Marcus frowned slightly. Why would my father request police presence at a will reading? You'll understand shortly. James opened the first folder. Let me start by establishing the legal framework. Under California law, a will must be signed by the testator in the presence of 2 witnesses who also sign. Any subsequent will supersedes previous versions, provided it meets all legal requirements. Right. Marcus waved his hand impatiently. Can we skip the lecture and get to the distribution of assets? We'll get there. James's voice carried an edge now. Marcus, you submitted a will to this office last Tuesday, claiming it was your father's final testament. Is that correct? Yes. The will he signed 3 months ago, leaving everything to me. And you're certain this was his final will? Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes. Why? James pulled out a document. Because 2 weeks before the will you submitted, Richard Sterling signed a different will in this very office, in the presence of myself and 2 other witnesses. That will, the actual final will, tells a very different story. The color began draining from Marcus's face. That's impossible. My father told me. Your father told you what you wanted to hear while he documented everything you were doing. James slid papers across the table. This is the real will, Marcus. Dated 2 weeks before the one you submitted. And before we discuss its contents, I need to address something serious. He opened another folder, this one thicker. The will you submitted to this office is a forgery. We've had it analyzed by 3 separate forensic document examiners. The signature is traced from an earlier document. The notary stamp is fake. The notary whose seal appears on your will confirmed she never witnessed any such signing. And the witnesses listed don't exist. Marcus stood up. This is insane. That's my father's will. He gave it to me himself. Sit down, Marcus. Detective Morrison's voice cut through the room. We'll get to your statement in a minute. The payments you made to Dylan Price, a paralegal who was disbarred last year for document fraud. James continued, sliding bank statements across the table. $15,000, transferred from your account to his over the course of 2 months. Mr. Price is currently cooperating with investigators and has confirmed you hired him to create a false will. Jennifer was staring at Marcus now, her face pale. Marcus, what is he talking about? Shut up, Marcus hissed at her. Furthermore, James pressed on, his voice harder now. Richard installed security cameras throughout his home 6 months ago. With audio. Those cameras captured multiple instances of you attempting to manipulate your father while he was medicated and confused. They captured you forging his signature on documents. They captured you stating explicitly that you intended to cut Lily out of the inheritance entirely. James pulled out a laptop and turned it toward the table. This footage is timestamped and authenticated. Detective Morrison has already reviewed it. Would you like to see? He pressed play. Richard's bedroom appeared on screen, dated 7 weeks before his death. Marcus sat beside the bed, holding papers. The audio was crystal clear. Dad, you don't want Lily to get anything, right? She's not real family. This paperwork makes sure the estate stays with Sterling blood. Just sign here. Richard's weak voice. I'm confused. What am I signing? Don't worry about it. I'm taking care of everything. Marcus tried to grab the laptop. Thomas moved faster, blocking him. Sit down and watch what you did. More clips played. Marcus going through Richard's files. Marcus on the phone. Yeah, once the old man's gone, I'll have full control. The wife doesn't know anything. Marcus telling friends at a bar. He's hanging on out of spite, I swear. But the doctors say weeks, maybe days. And then the most damning clip. Marcus standing in Richard's office, 3 months before his father's death, practicing Richard's signature over and over on scratch paper. When the laptop closed, Marcus was trembling. This is entrapment. We can use every frame, Detective Morrison said quietly. Your father had every right to record activities in his own home. And what we're seeing here constitutes elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. That's 3 felonies, Mr. Sterling. The room fell silent except for Jennifer's sharp intake of breath. The real will, James continued, pulling out the authenticated document, leaves 60% of Richard's estate to Lily Sterling, his wife of 14 years. 40% goes to Marcus Sterling, with conditions. Conditions? Marcus's voice cracked. Your father desperately wanted to believe you'd do the right thing after he died. He hoped you'd honor his marriage, treat Lily with respect, and accept your inheritance with grace. If you had done that, if you'd simply followed the terms of the real will, you would have received $1.7 million. No strings attached. James met Marcus's eyes. But Richard also prepared for the possibility that you wouldn't. That you'd forge documents, manipulate the estate, and treat Lily with cruelty. In that event, a separate clause activates. He read from the will. Should my son Marcus Sterling attempt through fraud, forgery, coercion, or any illegal means to deprive my wife Lily of her rightful inheritance, or should he treat her with deliberate cruelty in the wake of my death, his inheritance shall be reduced to $1, with the remainder distributed to charitable organizations specified in Appendix C. Marcus grabbed the edge of the table. No, that's not. He wouldn't. He did. James slid the full will across. Witnessed, notarized, legally airtight. You get $1, Marcus. Everything else goes to Lily, and to the charities your father supported. But I have debts. I have? Marcus stopped himself, but too late. You have $340,000 in gambling debts. James finished. Your father knew. He paid off your debts twice before, hoping you'd learn. You didn't. This was his final lesson. Jennifer stood up. I'm leaving. Marcus, don't call me. Jean, wait. But she was already gone. Heels clicking down the hallway. Thomas finally spoke. Richard called me 3 months ago. Told me what he suspected you were planning. Asked me to be here when the truth came out. His voice was heavy with disappointment. I told him he was wrong. I said you'd matured. That you'd honor his memory. I was wrong. Marcus's face had gone from pale to red. This is her fault. He pointed at Lily. She manipulated him. She isolated him from his real family. She has recordings, James interrupted, of you stealing her mother's jewelry, which is a separate theft charge. She has documentation of you changing locks and forcing a pregnant woman into inadequate housing, which violates tenant rights. She has witnesses who heard you celebrating your father's death at a party 4 days after his funeral. James's voice was cold now. And she has footage of you stating explicitly that you plan to use her wedding album as kindling. Detective Morrison stood. Marcus Sterling, I'm placing you under arrest for forgery, elder abuse, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Miranda rights, Marcus's face crumbled. Uncle Thomas, please. Tell them this is a mistake. I'm family. I'm your nephew. You're a disgrace to the Sterling name, Thomas said quietly. Richard gave you everything: education, opportunities, love, second chances. You repaid him by forging his will and abusing the woman he loved. He shook his head. I'll be there for you through the legal process because that's what family does. But I won't lie for you. You earned every bit of this. Detective Morrison escorted Marcus toward the door. At the threshold, Marcus turned back to Lily, and for the first time since this began, she saw something besides arrogance in his face. Terror. Lily, please. Tell them I didn't mean we can work something out. You don't need all that money. I'll go to jail if you stole my mother's jewelry, Lily said quietly. Called me a gold digger at your father's funeral. Threw me out while I'm pregnant with your father's child. Destroyed years of memories because they didn't fit your narrative. She stood, one hand on her stomach. Richard gave you every chance to be better than this. You chose otherwise. Now live with the consequences. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, and let the detective lead him away. After the door closed, the room exhaled collectively. James looked at Lily with something like respect. Richard would be proud of how you handled this. Though I suspect he'd be devastated it came to this. He already was, Lily said. That's why he prepared so thoroughly. He knew his son better than Marcus knew himself. If you've been following Lily's journey and want to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed, because justice is just the beginning of what comes next. 6 months later, Lily stood in the nursery of her new home, a modest 3-bedroom house 20 minutes from where she and Richard had lived. Not as large as the Sterling estate, but it was hers. Truly hers. The walls were painted soft yellow. A crib sat beneath the window, sunlight streaming across handmade quilts sent by nurses from the hospital where she'd worked. Richard's brother Thomas had driven down from Seattle to help assemble furniture, and he'd stayed for a week. The two of them slowly building the relationship Richard had always hoped they'd have. Her daughter, she'd named her Grace, after the quality Richard had embodied, not taken from, was due in 3 weeks. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Marcus pleaded guilty to forgery and elder abuse in exchange for a reduced sentence. 4 years in state prison, 5 years probation, and a permanent ban from contesting Richard's estate. His debts, unpaid, had resulted in bankruptcy. The BMW was repossessed. The fiancé never visited. But before sentencing, the judge had required something unusual at James Porter's request. Marcus had to watch all the security footage. Every clip of him manipulating his dying father, mocking Lily, celebrating Richard's death, destroying memories. Lily had been there that day, sitting in the courtroom gallery. She'd watched Marcus's face as he really saw himself for the first time. The arrogance had drained away, replaced by something that looked like horror. Horror at his own actions, maybe. Or just horror at getting caught. When it was over, Marcus had turned to look at her. No words, just a long look that might have been regret or might have been resentment. Lily would never know. She'd nodded once. Not forgiveness, she wasn't there yet. Might never be, but acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that the boy she'd raised had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. The Sterling estate sold for $2.1 million. After paying off Richard's remaining medical bills and making the charitable donations he'd specified, Lily had received roughly $3.4 million total. Not the $2 million Marcus had coveted, but more than enough to secure her daughter's future, pay off her own student loans and establish a foundation in Richard's name. The Richard Sterling Memorial Foundation provided scholarships to nursing students and funded palliative care programs for terminal patients whose families couldn't afford quality end-of-life support. Richard had died with dignity and love surrounding him. The foundation would help others do the same. Lily had returned to nursing part-time, working in the same ICU where she'd spent 15 years. Her colleagues had welcomed her back with tears and hugs, and a baby shower that filled her apartment with gifts. They'd known Richard. They'd mourned with her. And they'd celebrated when news spread about how thoroughly justice had been served. "You're glowing," her supervisor Maria had said during her first shift back. "I mean, partly the pregnancy, but also something else." "I'm free," Lily had answered simply. "For the first time in months, I'm just free." Thomas visited regularly. He'd confessed that his falling out with Richard years ago had been over their father's will. The same pattern repeating across generations. Their father had pitted the brothers against each other, turning inheritance into a weapon. Richard had sworn he'd never do that to his own son. "He tried," Thomas said during one visit, holding baby Grace after she was born. Richard tried so hard to raise Marcus differently. But some lessons people have to learn the hard way. "Do you think he's learning?" Lily asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I visit him once a month."
He's different now, quieter. I think reality hit him when he realized prison wasn't temporary.
That his whole life had changed because of choices he made. He looked at his niece. He asked about you. About the baby. I told him you named her Grace. What did he say? What did he say? What did he say? What did he name her Grace? What did he say? What did he say? He cried. Thomas shifted the baby gently. Said his father would have loved that name. That you deserved better than what he did to you. Lily absorbed that information without responding. Maybe Marcus was learning. Maybe he'd emerged from prison a different man. But that wasn't her responsibility anymore. Her responsibility was the 7-pound miracle sleeping in her arms, and the life she was building from the ashes of the one Marcus had tried to burn down. One afternoon, Lily received a package. Inside was a wooden box, carefully wrapped. The return address was the prison. She opened it slowly. Inside were 3 items: her mother's jade bracelet, the pearl earrings, and the gold locket with photos of Lily and her mother inside. There was a note in Marcus's handwriting, shaky and uncertain. These belong to you. I'm sorry I took them. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to return what was yours. Your daughter is lucky to have you. My father was lucky to have you. I was too stupid to see it. Marcus. Lily held the bracelet, the jade cool against her palm. She thought about 15 years of raising a boy who'd become a man she didn't recognize. She thought about Richard's desperate hope that his son would choose integrity over greed. She thought about Grace, sleeping in the next room, and the world she'd inherit. And she thought about the lesson Richard had taught with his final act, that sometimes the greatest love isn't protecting people from consequences. Sometimes it's making sure consequences arrive exactly when they're needed. A week later, Lily stood at Richard's grave for the first time since the funeral. She'd avoided it during the legal battles, unable to face the reality of his absence while fighting the mess he'd left behind. But now, with Grace in a carrier against her chest, she felt ready. We won, she said quietly to the headstone. Everything you planned worked. Marcus is paying for what he did. The foundation is helping people. Grace is healthy and perfect. We won. The wind rustled through trees planted around the cemetery. Somewhere nearby, birds sang. But I wish you were here to see it, Lily continued, her voice breaking slightly. I wish you could meet your daughter. I wish you'd been wrong about Marcus and we were all just living our lives without lawsuits and prisons and broken families. She stood there a long time, Grace sleeping peacefully, unaware that her father's grave was beneath them. Finally, Lily whispered the thing she'd been holding inside for months. Thank you for protecting us, for seeing what was coming and preparing for it, for loving me enough to make sure I'd be okay even after you were gone. Thank you, Richard. She left flowers, Japanese maple leaves, carefully preserved from the tree Marcus had cut down. Someone had saved branches for her, knowing they'd matter. 3 years later, Lily stood in the foundation's new office, surrounded by photographs of scholarship recipients. Young nurses, starting their careers without the crushing debt Lily had carried for years. Grace, now a curious 3-year-old, played with blocks in the corner while Lily reviewed grant applications. Marcus had been released 6 months earlier after serving his full sentence. He lived 2 states away now, working in construction, rebuilding his life from nothing. He sent birthday cards to Grace that Lily kept in a box, unsure if she'd ever share them, but unwilling to destroy them either. Thomas called every Sunday. He'd become the grandfather Grace would never know in Richard, teaching her songs, sending books, visiting when he could. And Lily? She'd learned something Richard had tried to teach Marcus, but that Marcus had to learn through devastation instead. Real wealth isn't money, it's integrity. It's knowing you can look at yourself in the mirror without shame. It's building something that helps others instead of just taking what you can get. Marcus had inherited millions in potential and thrown it away for greed. Lily had inherited Richard's values and turned them into something that would outlive them both. One evening, putting Grace to bed, Lily told her daughter a story. Once there was a man who loved his son very much. He gave his son everything: education, opportunities, second chances. But the son forgot that love isn't about what you can take. It's about what you give back. Grace, barely understanding, snuggled closer. Daddy? Yes, baby, you're Daddy. He was a good man who tried to teach important lessons. And even though he's not here, those lessons live on in us. Love? Grace asked. Love, Lily confirmed. And something else. Justice, and the difference between them. Richard Sterling had loved his son enough to give him every chance to do the right thing. But he'd loved Lily and the daughter he'd never meet enough to make sure justice prevailed when love wasn't enough. And that, Lily thought, laying Grace gently in her crib, was the greatest gift he could have left them. Not money. Not property. But the unshakable knowledge that truth matters, that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who refuse to let you destroy yourself without a fight. Marcus had learned that lesson in prison. Lily had learned it watching Richard prepare for his own death with the meticulous care of a man who understood that his final act would define his legacy. And Grace would learn it through the life her mother built from the ashes of someone else's greed. Life where integrity mattered more than inheritance, and where the measure of a person wasn't what they took, but what they gave. The best revenge, Lily had discovered, wasn't destroying the person who hurt you. It was building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of purpose that their cruelty became nothing but a footnote in your story of survival. What would you have done in Lily's position? Have you ever had to choose between immediate justice and strategic patience? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you that integrity always wins in the end, subscribe to the channel for more stories about people who refuse to let betrayal define them.